You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Tom Spender. Egypt is in crisis, with unrest growing over President Mohamed Morsi's decision to grant himself immunity from the courts and his efforts to push through a controversial new constitution. A special panel has produced a draft constitution, but without the participation of liberal and Christian members, who walked out over concerns that the document does not protect political and religious freedoms and women's rights. Morsi wants to hold a referendum on the draft constitution later this month. But meanwhile, deadly clashes have taken place between opposition supporters, who fear Morsi could be installing a new dictatorship, and supporters of Morsi's Muslim Brotherhood organization, who say Egypt's judges could derail the country's transition to democracy. With all this going on, the big question is, where is Egypt heading? With me in the studio to discuss this are Mohamed Amara, an opposition activist, Dr. Mohamed Ghanim, a member of the Muslim Brotherhood in the UK, and Rosemary Hollis, Professor of Middle East Policy Studies at City University in London. I want to start by asking each of you briefly to answer the following question. Is Egypt still on course for democracy? Mohamed Ghanim, perhaps I'll start with you.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you for inviting me. I would say Egypt after Mubarak and after the revolution is insisting to go through democratic path, and no one, no power can stop it, whatever internally or externally, and no one can discriminate about any political, peaceful movement, whatever it is, from left to right, including Muslim Brotherhood.
Mohamed Amara.
I think yes, and I think the revolution is still on, and I think part of the actually disagreement is when would the revolution start to change its path and take a more organized way rather than opposition all the time.
Professor Hollis.
Well, I think what we need to know is whether the president will fulfill his promise to relinquish the powers that he's taken for the duration of seeing through the referendum on the draft constitution. And there's no way of knowing what will happen between now and then, and therefore whether he will indeed do as promised and make this a purely temporary measure.
Mr. Ghanim, President Morsi has said that he will cancel the powers that he has given himself. But there, obviously some people are saying maybe they don't believe him. I mean, should they believe him?
Well, it's not up to him to cancel it or not to cancel it. What is happening is that he's got a constitution being written by 100 member of the Egyptian, highly qualified, honestly working 6 month hard time, and the new constitution would cancel his power from the decree and limited it to a minimum, as never Egypt seen a president with less power as this constitution. The Egyptian people happy about the constitution. They would like to go through. His election was the first step to democracy. This is most important, crucial point for carrying on democracy and being bound by a constitution which is fairly agreed by the Egyptian people.
Mohamed Omar, what do you make of that?
The recent decisions taken by Morsi has definitely created a clear split in the Egyptian community and the activist society and most of the opposition forces. However, most of the supporters only rely on good intentions, which is something you cannot impose on everyone. I voted for him. I regret voting for him because I was not consulted, and there is no attention to what I am saying. Even his nearest circle, they are just not happy with what's happening now. And I can go on with a conspiracy theory, and there is a lot of people want to take him down, and Mubarak's men all over the place. Yes, but this is not good enough for me to leave you without any supervision for 10 or 12 or 15 days, because I learned not to trust people, and we learned it the hard way. And until this very minute, we are still waiting for a clear answer and for something that will really convince me that this is not just for the sake of the group or a small or a big a part of the community. This is something for the whole community and the whole Egyptians. So if you make me see your point, I then can start believing in you. But as things go now, I cannot trust you enough. I didn't see the changes I want to see in the police. I didn't see the changes that I want to see in the media. I didn't see the changes that I want to see in everyday today security. I know it's a hard job, but you have to convince me more because people are really suffering and they are on the edge.
Can I just ask you, on the basis of what you've said, is it that you don't see the changes you want to see in the draft constitution, or you don't see the changes you want to see in the process by which politics is conducted in Egypt at the moment? Because it seems to me that there's two elements to the crisis. One is about the process by which the revolution is proceeding and who takes what powers until the revolution is complete. And the other is whether the draft constitution leaves too much open to interpretation for some people.
This is a very good question because a lot of people would say we don't want a very, very, very long sentences in the constitution draft, and we want to leave it for the people to decide the laws to explain the constitution. And then people will come and tell you, well, we know that the laws are going to be made by a majority of right-sided current, if I may call it this way. So people are anticipating and are presuming that the explanations will have a very, very dangerous impact. You cannot blame them for this because, on the other hand, they haven't seen what at least the police, the chief of the police now, is a lot of people accuse him for being...
But hang on, can I understand? You're saying that as the draft constitution stands, if it is to be implemented by an assembly, by a government that you see as leaning in the direction of the Muslim Brotherhood perspective on the right way to proceed, that will not be satisfactory for a lot of Egyptians. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and then people will tell you, let's vote then and see if the majority wants it or not. And you cannot deny them this right, because if you believe that my vote and your vote is equal when we go and vote on the same day, so I have to respect you regardless you're ignorant, or you're not educated enough, or you don't have a political vision. A lot of people, professors, will only want to go back to their old days when they had good income and money and they want to proceed their lives. And like a lot of villagers will do the same. So if he's counting on this, fine, but this is morally wrong, and he hasn't convinced me. But at the end of the day, I cannot say I will not allow people to vote, because if I am not happy, because he's taken my right to question him.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. What concerns you more, the decrees granting himself powers and immunity ultimately from the judiciary, or the content of the draft constitution?
Definitely the content of the draft constitution.
Mohamed Ghanim, the draft constitution, people are worried that it doesn't do enough to protect political and religious freedoms, and it doesn't do enough to protect women's rights. And it was agreed by a kind of biased panel because there wasn't great participation from Christian members or liberal members. What do you say about that?
It's absolutely not true. The Christian church was involved in the Constitution article. But anyway, I'm not going to argue all these things. Is overall, either you accept democracy or not. And the only way out to give the Egyptian people a better way of life is to go through democracy. And democracy cannot be divided. You have to go to the ballot box and let people vote. When they decide, the constitution is not the end. It is the beginning, but you're going to get a parliament which is being chosen by the people, and within the constitution, an article, 1/5 of the parliament can change. And this is the process we have to go through. There is no other way.
But he's asking a lot, isn't he? Because surely granting himself sweeping powers, as I've said before, it's profoundly undemocratic in the eyes of other people. He's basically saying, I can do what I want and no one can challenge me. And then in the next breath, he's saying, trust me, I will deliver democracy because it's going to be a referendum. I mean, surely you can see that that's difficult to take for some sections of the population.
Some people like to take us in this vicious circle. He said that why he does that to protect the institution, because we got something called Supreme Constitution Court, which is an extent to Mubarak's system, which every judge of them take a £2 million salary a day, and they would like to protect that. If you talk about the Egyptian people and the justice, social justice, how can you change that without democracy, without a constitution, without a parliament, which people have the right to choose? Then the parliament can take Egypt through, if they don't like any article of the constitution, they can change it.
My understanding is that there was an inclusive process for the drafting of the constitution at the beginning, but then the members of that constitutional committee fell out, and it was the Christians and the secular elements that left the scene just as the president felt it appropriate to speed up this process. Initially, he'd wanted to extend the process of drafting the constitution in order to make sure that it represented a consensus of views and that he represented an inclusive administration in Egypt. And there is an interpretation of the current crisis which basically says that Morsi did what he needed to do to preserve the constitutional process from what he anticipated would be an attack from the judiciary. And he preempted the possibility of them undermining the process. But unfortunately, he's had to resort to non-constitutional or certainly non-democratic methods in order to protect the revolution. So you see, it seems to me that there's a strong case on both sides. And what has to prevail, if there's not to be a deadly contest in Egypt, is a sense of common purpose for the good and betterment of the whole Egyptian people. And I don't think outside observers are necessarily going to be helpful in this, because I think the outside players, including the United States, yes, they're afraid of chaos in Egypt, but also they have preferences in terms of how this battle amongst Egyptians works out.
Rosemary Hollis, if I could just ask you one question. You said Morsi was trying to protect the revolution in his act. Is it the case that there is a problem with the judiciary in Egypt? Does it interfere? Is it non-partisan or is it partisan?
Well, as Dr. Ghanem has intimated, the sense is that the judiciary, as it currently stands, is dominated by people who rose to power through the ranks of the lawyers during the Mubarak era, and that therefore they're not on side with President Morsi's objectives.
Mohamed Amara.
I totally agree with Professor Rosemary. Few of the very big leaders of opposition right now, they led the campaign to dissolve the elected parliament earlier. And this is a very, very good cause for bad blood between the two parties. And all the time this is happening. I was in Cairo 4 months ago and I met a 14-year-old guy. And we were going to the square together. So we were chatting because both of us had flags. And he was saying, can you believe, and he was 14. And I said, can you believe all these parties? They haven't even supplied us with brochures or like flyers about different political, definitions like communist, like socialism. Can you believe? I don't know what socialism is. And this is something that you should blame all the parties. They only go to people when they need their votes, and then they disappear and they fight for media and for other things. And the people who blame Morsi now for having too much power are the very same people who took the power away from the parliament that we elected, regardless of the results of that. And this makes the debate is really, really, really hard on the way it stands now. And now everyone just has to stop and step back and think about the whole thing and see if his policy and strategy is leading to a better Egypt or not. And this is not hard to miss. You just can have a look around and see if it's a better Egypt or not. It's definitely not.
Do you feel that the divisions in Egyptian society are deepening?
It started on the 19th of March, on the very first referendum, unfortunately, when people thought that there is a religious background for voting. And this has been fed by both parties, and now we're paying for it. I think it got a lot deeper, but I think it's never too late, because the way things stand now is not serving or doing any good for anyone except Mubarak and his men.
Well, we're all told on the outside that Egypt, the Egyptian population, are the vast majority who are not Coptic Christians. The vast majority are observant Muslims, basically, in a quiet, private, conservative way. So, and it was the case that even under Mubarak, that the constitution said that the principles of Sharia would be the principles upon which the law of Egypt is based. So one senses that there shouldn't be too much contention about Islam in the state unless it appears to be used as a vehicle for enhancing the power of some politicians over others.
Well, I think the nature, as the professor said, to Muslim, to Egypt or Egyptian society, majority is Muslim. But even, I would say, the Christian as well have the Islamic culture within them, because within Islam we respect any belief. There is no trouble between Muslim and non-Muslim. I'm sorry to say that there is some people whose beneficiary supporting a dictatorship because their own benefit. They indulge in the loyalty benefit from the dictatorship. Those people still remaining there. They're not democratic. They don't care about democracy or the Egyptian people. They just care about their pocket. Then the struggle not between ideology. The other section is there's people say they are Almani or liberal. I wouldn't say this is all them under secular. This is the word they say. They translate it in a different way, which it does not mean anything. It empty the world. We know either you become.
Am I not right in thinking that the translation, unfortunately, of the word secular is actually non-believer, as opposed to non-judging of what your faith is?
I wouldn't agree. I studied this human science inside out. Secular came as a movement against the power of the church. That's it. It's not. Some of the secular was believer, but is against the dictatorship or the abusing of the power by the church institution, and that struggle being brought to Egypt, where in Islam we do not have a religious institution, we do not have a church, and that make the struggle completely. That's why being secular in Egyptian society does not mean anything.
But, I mean, from an outside point of view, the draft of the new constitution, it has Islam as the basis for consultation for making new laws. That's the same as it was in the Mubarak era. I mean, what's the point of this whole process if you're just going to if you're not going to bring anything new into a new constitution?
Yeah, the whole idea about that, all the Egyptian people accept that. Not because it is ideology, because they see a fairness in Islam. They all accept it, whether you like it or not. Even maybe somebody doesn't like it, but Egyptian people feel that's a security for all the society. This is the security which any ideology can take an identity without any harm. This has been all the case, and it will remain. To have an opinion to change it, you won't get it.
Mohamed Amara, is Mr. Ghanem right?
Well, I think, to be honest, I don't see the whole point of discussing the second. It was the same in 1971 Constitution, and I don't see it having any impact or anything. If you go to a mosque in Cairo in Ramadan, you think this country is more religious than Saudi, and then 5 minutes walk from the mosque you'll find a cafe full of people smoking shisha, and they're not even bothered by going to the mosque. And then you will find belly dancers in things called Ramadan tents. So it's a crazy collection of people, and this is the very core of the charm. The other thing is about constitution and this whole debate. I think we've been distracted by discussing the religious basis of the constitution. While it has not changed, at the very same time, we have looked away from the military, the more powers given for the army, the more powers given for the president in some points. And just to sum this up, Turkey has a secular constitution, but we're actually accusing Erdogan to be too much right-wing side. Constitution will not change how the nation behave. We want laws that will punish people who break the laws, and then we can start talking about anything else. Because it doesn't make any sense to say I'm religious so I can kill you, or I am secular so I can kill you. It doesn't make any sense.
There is one key difference in the draft, which presumably you regard as positive. It is that any president cannot serve for more than 2 terms, and the length of term is now 4 years instead of 6 in the draft, right?
Yes. It has a lot of positive points. I'm not denying the positive points, and I'm not an expert.
And okay, what about the business of military courts, though? Because that struck me as an advance as well.
You're totally right about it. And people were talking about this constitution in a way that it kept some balances to keep the wheel spinning. So it's giving the extreme right the religious basis for everything, and it's giving the army some. It has less powers for the army, but not the way we exactly want.
You're listening to The Voice of Russia in London. I'm Tom Spender, and we're talking about the crisis in Egypt. With me in the studio are Mohamed Amara, an Egyptian opposition activist, Dr. Mohamed Ghanem, a member of the Muslim Brotherhood in the UK, and Rosemary Hollis, Professor of Middle East Policy Studies at City University in London.
You know, there's something tragic about this situation.
Yes. We cannot even celebrate the first constitution we're having in years.
It's not the actual draft that's really the cause of the split between Egyptians. And the arguments why Morsi took these exceptional powers for the interim also point to...
Can I tell you why?
His justification
because
that can be seen.
This Constitutional Court has already dissolved the parliament, which nowhere in the world an appointed member of the judiciary to dissolve an elected body. That's why Mr. Morsi done that.
Yes, we said this earlier, but my sense is this is what's so tragic, because the division in society could take on its own dynamic as a result of people being in the streets, tanks now on the streets, and violence will take this in a direction that, in a sense, it need not go.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm sorry, I think this is where he came from, just going with the good intention theory, where this Morsi came from. Because this can go on. If Morsi tomorrow, if he chooses a panel to write the constitution, composed of 80% liberals and secular, or call them whatever you want, and 20% Muslim, activists or Islamists or Muslim Brotherhood or right wing, and these people have went on for 6 months writing everything down, and before the vote, 2 weeks, all the right wing has just withdrawn, and then you will be sitting there. Why did they withdraw? Why did they have? Are you going to be asking the same question, or are you going to be biased? And this is the same question we should ask ourselves. How are we going to take this forward? Is it by obstructing him for fears of being a dictator, or is it by buying more time while we keep our eyes open? And there is no right or wrong about it, but there are deadlines and there are red lines that we shouldn't kill each other, we shouldn't use blood in politics, we shouldn't use religion in politics, and we shouldn't claim the rest of the nation as they don't know what they're doing. We have to respect every single minority and every single opposition.
So in a sense, we're still having the debate that would precede the kind of transition that the country is actually trying to carry out right now. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and I'm saying if the worst goes worst and this constitution passes, And if there is an opposition figure who is actively working against some items in the constitution, he has got the time and the dynamics to go through elections and to have a 20% in the parliament and to vote. And if you cannot do it, you cannot claim that you are like a reliable person, because if you say, okay, the majority of people disagree on this, fine. If the worst goes worst, I will take your idea to the parliament. 20% of the parliament members can change can actually amend or add or can make changes. And this is a very, very, very good point on Morsi's side as well. I cannot say who's right or who's wrong, but what I can say is that this has to stop because it's not leading anywhere. He has to review his decisions and he has to compromise in a way that will not actually shake his image, if I may say, and of course in a way that will satisfy a lot of people. And on the other side, the opposition has to state clear messages without any previous conditions. Don't make the discussion too hard. Just come and prove to me that you are not just using the blood on the streets for pure personal interest. Prove to me that you want things to go forward.
Whatever it's happened, we have to go back to the table and discuss. Put precondition, especially to the one in power. That's not acceptable. If you want to argue politically, then you should sit in the table without any precondition, then talk. Maybe that will solve the problem.
Okay, so it's an extremely complex situation. I think we can all agree on that. We've come to the end of our discussion, so I'm just going to ask you to sum up, really, in brief, where you think, what's next for Egypt? What do you think will happen, Professor Hollis?
I think Egypt is on a knife edge, and it could go the path of other revolutions where there is blood on the streets in order to decide who comes out on top of the revolutionary process. And it could lead to a rethink on all sides, negotiation, and some kind of compromise that Egyptians, the vast majority, embrace for fear of the abyss. I don't wish to predict which it's going to be.
Mohamed Ghanem.
I think the unfortunate for Egypt to have an opposition irresponsible. They create a mood for violence. They either with the Mubarak regime or they don't see it. But the majority of Egyptian people will decide the fate democratically. It will take its course, but Egypt is going through democracy, constitution, parliament, all these democratic process.
Mohamed Amara.
I think transparency is not an option anymore for Morsi if he wants to keep his legitimacy and his support. So he has to start doing things according to more agreements from other parties from now on. On the other hand, I think people are not blind. They can see the killers standing next shoulder to shoulder to some opposition figures. However, people going to the streets to protest, it's a big mix. A lot of them are really, really right, and they have rights and they have demands that he should listen to. Otherwise, I cannot tell you which part is going to win this, because everyone will be a loser at the very end.
Rosemary Hollis, Professor of Middle East Policy Studies at City University in London, Dr. Mohamed Ghanem, member of the Muslim Brotherhood in the UK, and Mohamed Amara, an opposition activist. Thank you very much.